The rope burns on her wrists were still bleeding when Quinlan Dawson first saw her through the dust and heat shimmer of the Arizona afternoon, bound so tight to that ancient cottonwood that her hands had turned purple above the bindings. He pulled his mare to such an abrupt halt that she snorted her displeasure, hooves scraping against the sun-baked earth just outside Snowflake in this year of our Lord 1873, and for a moment he could only stare at the sight before him, wondering if the desert sun had finally cooked his brain into hallucinations. But no, she was real enough, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, her dress torn at the shoulder, her eyes meeting his with a defiance that stopped his breath in his chest, even as her lips cracked and, bleeding from thirst, tried to form words that wouldn't come. He was off his horse before conscious thought caught up with his body, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran toward her, pulling his knife from his belt. She flinched when she saw the blade, but he was already talking, his voice rough from the trail, but gentle in a way he hadn't used in years. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to cut you free." The rope was thick and new, which told him this hadn't been some old restraint left over from cattle work or a forgotten hitching post. Someone had tied her here deliberately, had meant for her to suffer or die or both. And the rage that thought sparked in his gut was so sudden and fierce it nearly made his hands shake as he sawed through the bindings. She collapsed forward the moment the rope gave way, and he caught her against his chest, feeling how light she was, how her whole body trembled with exhaustion and fear, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Water," she whispered, and he was already reaching for his canteen, supporting her weight as he brought it to her lips. She drank too fast, and he had to pull it away, making her slow down even as she protested with a small sound of desperation. "Not too quick, or you'll be sick," he said, and she nodded, understanding even through her obvious distress. He let her drink again, more slowly this time, and watched as some color started to return to her pale cheeks. Her eyes were brown, he noticed, deep and warm like good earth after rain, and they studied him with an intensity that made him aware of every scar on his face, every day of trail dust ground into his skin. "Who did this to you?" he asked when she'd had enough water, when she pushed the canteen away and tried to stand on her own. Her legs wouldn't hold her, and she would have fallen if he hadn't kept his arm around her waist. The feel of her body against his was doing strange things to his heartbeat, but he pushed that aside, focused on the practical matters at hand. "Men," she said, her voice stronger now but still rough as sandpaper. "4 of them. They took my wagon, my supplies, everything I had. Said they were going to come back after dark to finish what they started. But they wanted me to have time to think about it first." The rage in his gut turned cold and deadly, the way it always did when he was really angry, when he'd moved past the hot flash of temper into something much more dangerous. How long ago? Few hours, I think. Hard to tell. The sun was higher. She lifted her hands and looked at her wrists, at the blood and the deep grooves the rope had left. Her fingers were still not quite the right color, and she flexed them slowly, wincing at what must have been considerable pain. He noticed her hands were refined, not the work-roughened hands of a ranch woman or a farmer's daughter, and that told him a story all its own. "Can you ride?" He was already thinking ahead, already planning. They couldn't stay here, not with those men likely to return, and Snowflake was still a good 5 miles north. His horse could carry them both, if she could hold on. "I think so." She tried again to stand, and this time managed it, though she swayed and had to grip his arm for balance. "I'm Olivia Reed. I owe you my life, mister. Quinlan Dawson, most folks call me Quinn." He kept his hand on her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell. "And you can thank me when we're somewhere safe. Right now, we need to move." She nodded, and he saw the steel in her, despite her weakened state, saw the determination that must have kept her alive through what had to have been several hours of torture in the merciless Arizona heat. He'd called prisoners brave before, men who'd faced down bandits or wild animals, or the harsh cruelty of the frontier. But there was something about the way this woman held herself, about the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, that made the word feel new on his tongue. "You're brave," he said, and meant it more than he'd meant most things in his life. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them in that moment, something he couldn't name but could feel all the way down to his bones. Then she was moving, letting him help her toward his horse, and he was lifting her up into the saddle with hands that were suddenly aware of every point of contact between them. He swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady, and tried not to think about how perfectly she fit against him, about the scent of her hair even dirty and sweat-soaked, about the trust implicit in how she leaned back into his chest as he urged the mare into a steady lope toward town. They rode in silence for the first mile, him scanning the horizon for any sign of the men who'd done this to her simply holding on and trying not to fall apart now that rescue had come. He could feel the tremors that occasionally ran through her body, the way she'd catch her breath sometimes, as if fighting back tears or panic or both. His arm tightened around her waist without his conscious permission, a gesture of comfort and protection that felt as natural as breathing. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked finally, because the question had been eating at him, and because her silence was starting to worry him. People who'd been through trauma sometimes went too quiet, sometimes let the shock take them under, and he needed her to stay present, to stay with him. "Traveling to Snowflake," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm a teacher. The town hired me to come run their school. I had a wagon driver, an older man named Mr. Peterson, but he died 2 days back. Heart just gave out in the night. I buried him as best I could and kept going because there was nothing else to do. Then those men found me yesterday evening." A teacher. That explained the refined hands, the careful way she spoke even in distress. "Where from?" "Boston, originally." There was a wealth of story in those 2 words, in the way she said them. "More recently, Denver. I taught there for 3 years, but wanted something different, somewhere I could make more of a difference." "Well, you picked some different, all right," he said dryly, and was rewarded with a small huff of almost laughter that made something warm unfurl in his chest. "Snowflake's as frontier as it gets. Good people, though, mostly. They'll treat you right." "Are you from there?" She shifted slightly in the saddle, and he caught a glimpse of her profile, the straight nose and stubborn chin, the way her hair was trying to escape its pins and dark, wavy tendrils. "Nearby, I have a ranch about 10 miles west, run cattle mostly. Was coming into town for supplies when I found you." He'd been thinking about stopping at the saloon, too, maybe playing some cards and having a drink to wash away the loneliness that had been dogging him more than usual lately. 28 years old, and he'd been working his land for 6 years now, building something from nothing, and most days that was enough. But some days the silence got too heavy, the empty house too cold even in the summer heat. He'd started thinking maybe it was time to consider finding a wife, settling down proper, but the women in Snowflake were either already married or too young, or just not interested in a taciturn rancher who spent more time with cattle than people. Now here was this woman, literally dropped into his path by fate or providence or dumb luck, and he could already feel himself getting attached in a way that was probably foolish and definitely too fast. "Thank God you were," she said quietly. "Coming into town, I mean. Another few hours and I don't think I would have made it. The thirst was bad, but the sun was worse. I could feel myself starting to not think right." He'd seen men die of thirst and exposure, knew exactly what she meant. The fact that she was coherent and talking after hours tied in the direct sun spoke to a constitution stronger than her slim frame suggested. "You're safe now," he told her, and made it a promise. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She turned her head to look up at him, and their faces were suddenly very close, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough that her breath ghosted across his jaw. "Why?" she asked, and it wasn't suspicion in her voice but genuine curiosity. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." "You're someone who needed help," he said simply. "That's enough." The look she gave him then was complicated, layered with emotions he couldn't quite parse, but there was gratitude in it, and something else, something that made his heart do that strange skip-beat thing again. Then she turned back to face forward and they rode on, his arm around her waist and her body warm against his chest. And Quinlan found himself hoping the remaining miles to town would take just a little bit longer. Snowflake appeared on the horizon like a small collection of toy buildings, growing larger as they approached, until he could make out individual structures and people moving about their business on the main street. It wasn't much of a town yet, just a few years old and still raw around the edges, but it had good water and good people and a determination to build something lasting in this hard country. He guided his horse toward the doctor's house, a neat wooden structure at the north end of town with a painted sign out front declaring it the office of Dr. Samuel Harrison. Olivia had gone very still against him, and when he looked down he saw her staring at the town with something like trepidation on her face. "What's wrong?" "I was supposed to arrive in a wagon with my things, looking presentable and professional," she said quietly. "Now I'm arriving like this, looking like I've been dragged through a canyon backwards, with a strange man and nothing to my name. What will they think?" "They'll think you survived something that would have killed most people," he said firmly, "and they'll be grateful you made it here at all. Come on, let's get you looked at properly, doctor." Harrison was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and steady hands, and he clucked his tongue in concern when he saw Olivia's wrists and the state she was in. "Get her inside, Quinn. Mrs. Harrison will help get her settled while I examine her injuries. You might want to go fetch Sheriff Garrett, tell him what happened." Quinn helped Olivia down from the horse, and for a moment after her feet touched the ground, she swayed against him, her hands gripping his arms for balance. He steadied her, and she looked up at him with those deep brown eyes, and he very nearly forgot there were other people watching. "Thank you," she said, soft enough that only he could hear. "Truly." "I'll be back," he promised. "Soon as I talk to the sheriff. You're not getting rid of me that easy." A small smile touched her cracked lips, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to something that struck him breathless. Then, Mrs. Harrison was there, a motherly woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense manner, taking charge of Olivia and ushering her inside with gentle efficiency. Quinn watched until the door closed behind them, then made himself turn and walk back to his horse, back to the practical matters that needed handling. Sheriff Tom Garrett was in his office, a small room attached to the town's single jail cell, and he looked up from his paperwork when Quinn walked in. "Quinn, wasn't expecting to see you today. What brings you to town?" Quinn told him, laying out the facts in clear, concise terms. Garrett's face grew progressively darker as the story unfolded, and by the end, he was on his feet, hand on his gun. "4 men, you said? She get a good look at them?" "I didn't ask for details yet. She was in rough shape, needed the doctor first. But she's clear-headed. She'll be able to describe them." "And they said they were coming back after dark." Garrett checked his pocket watch. "That gives us maybe 4 hours if we're lucky. I'll get some men together, ride out to where you found her, see if we can track them before they make it back." "I'm coming with you," Quinn said, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't up for debate. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but let me do the talking when we find them, unless shooting starts. Then do what you do best." Quinn had a reputation, earned over hard years of protecting his ranch, and occasionally helping the law with particular problems that required a steady hand and no hesitation. He wasn't proud of some of the things he'd done, but he wasn't ashamed either. The frontier was hard, and sometimes hard, men were needed to keep the peace and protect the innocent. They gathered 4 more men, all steady and reliable, and rode out within the hour. Quinn led them to the cottonwood where he'd found Olivia, and even though she was gone, the sight of that rope still tied to the tree, stained with her blood, made his rage flare hot again. Garrett examined the scene with a tracker's eye, then pointed east. 4 horses, heading toward the mountains. They probably have a camp somewhere in the foothills. Quinn, you're our best tracker after me. You take point with me, rest of you spread out and keep your eyes open." The trail was clear enough at first, 4 horses moving at a steady pace, careless because they thought no one would follow or care. As the ground grew rockier, the tracks became harder to read, but between Quinn's eye and Garrett's experience, they kept on it, following the signs deeper into the rough country east of town. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, when they spotted smoke rising from a small canyon ahead. Garrett held up a hand, and they all stopped, dismounting and tying their horses well back from the canyon rim. They approached on foot, moving carefully, and when they reached a point where they could see down into the canyon, Quinn felt his jaw tighten with anger. 4 men sat around a fire, laughing and drinking, passing around a bottle of what was probably whiskey stolen from Olivia's wagon. Her wagon itself was nearby, still half full of crates and trunks, and the men were clearly in no hurry to hide their crime or move on. "Recognize any of them?" Garrett whispered. Quinn studied the faces, lit by firelight and fading sun. "That one on the left, I've seen him before. Name's Cutter, works as a gun for hire sometimes. Bad reputation. Don't know the others." "I know the big one," said one of the men who'd come with them, a rancher named Bill Thompson. "That's Jake Morley. He's wanted in Texas for robbery and assault. There's a price on his head." Garrett nodded slowly. All right then, here's how we do this. They moved into position, coming down into the canyon from three sides, and Garrett's voice rang out clear and authoritative in the dimming light. You men by the fire, this is Sheriff Tom Garrett of Snowflake. You're under arrest for robbery, assault, and attempted murder. Put your hands where I can see them and stand up slowly. For a moment, Quinn thought they might actually surrender. Then Cutter went for his gun and everything exploded into chaos and noise. Quinn dropped to one knee and fired, saw Cutter go down clutching his arm, saw another man fall as one of the posse's bullets found its mark. Jake Morley made a run for the horses, but Bill Thompson cut him off, and then Garrett was in close with the fourth man, subduing him with efficient brutality. When the echoes of gunfire faded and the dust settled, 3 of the 4 men were alive and restrained, and the 4th lay still on the ground where he'd fallen, victim of a bullet through the heart. Quinn felt nothing looking at the body except a grim satisfaction that this man wouldn't threaten anyone ever again. Search the wagon, Garrett ordered. See what all they took, make sure it's all here. It was all there, or most of it anyway. The men had drunk some of the supplies and eaten some of the food, but Olivia's personal belongings were untouched, still packed in a battered trunk with her initials carved into the lid. Quinn found himself running his hand over those initials, thinking about the woman who owned them, about her courage and her smile, and the way she'd felt in his arms. You got it bad already, don't you? Bill Thompson said from beside him, not unkindly. Quinn looked up, startled. What? The teacher lady. Saw the way you looked at her when we rode past the doctor's office. Got that moonstruck expression my wife says I had when I first met her. Bill grinned. Can't say I blame you. Takes a special kind of strong to survive what she did. I just met her, Quinn protested, but it sounded weak even to his own ears. Sometimes that's all it takes. My wife says she knew the first day she met me that we'd be married. Took me a bit longer to figure it out, but she was right. Bill clapped him on the shoulder. Don't fight it, son. Life's too short and good women are too rare, especially out here. They rode back to Snowflake with their prisoners and Olivia's recovered wagon as the stars came out overhead, bright and infinite in the clear desert sky. Quinn kept thinking about what Bill had said, about knowing quickly, about not fighting it. He'd always figured love was something that grew slowly over time, built on shared experience and common goals. But what he felt when he looked at Olivia, when he thought about her smile and her courage and the way she'd trusted him to keep her safe, that didn't feel slow or gradual. That felt like lightning, sudden and bright and impossible to ignore. It was full dark by the time they got back to town, and lights glowed warm in windows up and down the street. They took the prisoners to the jail first, locking them up secure, while Garrett sent a telegram to the territorial marshal about Jake Morley's wanted status. Then Quinn helped drive Olivia's wagon to the doctor's house, where she was presumably still resting and recovering. Mrs. Harrison met him at the door, looking pleased. Quinn Dawson, you're a sight for sore eyes. Come in, come in. Olivia's been asking after you, wanting to know if you came back safe. Something warm and bright bloomed in Quinn's chest at that. She all right? She will be, dehydrated and exhausted, some nasty rope burns and bruising, but nothing that won't heal. She's made of strong stuff, that one. Mrs. Harrison led him through the house to a small sitting room where Olivia sat in a chair by the window, wearing a borrowed dress and with her hair cleaned and braided. She looked up when he entered, and her whole face lit with relief and something else, something that made his breath catch. You're back, she said, and there was such feeling in those 2 words that he had to clear his throat before he could speak. Told you I would be. We got the men who did this to you, all but one who won't hurt anyone again. And we got your wagon back, everything that was in it. Her hands flew to her mouth, and he saw tears spring to her eyes. My things, all of them, everything. It's outside if you want to see, or we can store it somewhere until you're ready to go through it. She stood up, moving carefully but steadier than before, and came toward him. For a moment he thought she might hug him, and he wasn't sure what he'd do if she did, how he'd handle having her in his arms again when he already wanted to keep her there. But she stopped just short of touching, looking up at him with those expressive eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, and then you got justice for what they did. I'm in your debt. No debt, he said firmly. You don't owe me anything, Olivia. The sound of her name on his lips made her smile, soft and sweet. Then, can we call it friendship? I don't have many of those here yet, being as I just arrived in such dramatic fashion. Friendship, he agreed, though the word felt inadequate for what was building between them, for the pull he felt toward her that was already so much more than simple friendship. I'd like that. Mrs. Harrison cleared her throat from the doorway, reminding them they weren't alone. Olivia needs her rest, Quinn, and I suspect you could use some yourself. Why don't you come back tomorrow? Help her get settled into the teacher's cottage. The town council set one up for her. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and has good bones. He nodded, reluctant to leave, but knowing she was right. I'll come by after breakfast if that suits you. That would be perfect, Olivia said. Sleep well, Quinn. You too. He made himself turn and walk away, though every instinct screamed at him to stay, to keep her in his sight where he could protect her. But she was safe here with the Harrisons, safe in this town that would claim her as their own, and he needed to let her rest and heal. He got a room at the boarding house that night, too tired to ride back to his ranch and too keyed up to sleep anyway. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about brown eyes and quiet courage and the feel of a woman's body against his chest, thinking about tomorrow and all the tomorrows that might come after, if he was brave enough to reach for them. Morning came bright and clear, the sun burning away the cool night air with typical Arizona efficiency. Quinn washed and shaved with more care than usual, and tried not to think about why he was putting effort into his appearance. When he made his way to the doctor's house, he found Olivia already outside, standing beside her wagon and examining its contents with a mixture of relief and sadness on her face. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and the smile that broke across her face when she saw him was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Good morning. Morning. He came to stand beside her, looking at the crates and trunks that held her worldly possessions. How are you feeling? Sore, she admitted. But better. Dr. Harrison says I was lucky, that it could have been much worse. Thanks to you, it wasn't. He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude, even though it warmed him. Anyone would have done the same. That's not true and you know it, but I won't belabor the point. She gestured at the wagon. Mrs. Harrison says the teacher's cottage is on the south side of town. Would you help me get these things over there? I promise I won't make you unpack everything. Just help me move the heavy crates. I'll help with whatever you need, he said, and meant it more broadly than just moving boxes. The teacher's cottage was small but well built, with 2 rooms and a front porch that looked out over a patch of land that could be turned into a garden. Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the table inside, a welcoming gesture that made Olivia's eyes go soft with emotion. They spent the morning hauling her belongings inside, and Quinn found himself learning about her through the things she owned. Books, so many books that they filled 3 crates all by themselves. Teaching supplies and slates and chalk. Modest clothing and practical shoes. A photograph in a silver frame of a stern-looking older couple who must have been her parents, both dead, now she told him quietly. A wedding ring quilt that had been her grandmother's, the only heirloom she'd brought with her. Why come all the way out here? He asked as they took a break, sitting on the porch with cold water and some bread and cheese Mrs. Harrison had sent along. You could have stayed in Denver, taught in an established school. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the street and the rough buildings and the vast sky beyond. I wanted to matter, she said finally. In Denver, I was one teacher among many, teaching children who would have learned with or without me. Here I can make a real difference. These children need someone who cares, who'll fight for their education. And I needed somewhere that felt like I was building something, not just maintaining what already existed. He understood that, understood it bone deep, because it was the same reason he'd come west 6 years ago, the same reason he worked himself to exhaustion building his ranch. It's not easy out here, he warned. It's hard and lonely and sometimes dangerous, as you've already learned. Nothing worth doing is easy, she said, and looked at him with such directness that he felt pinned by her gaze. Why did you come here, Quinn? What made you choose this life? No one had asked him that in years, maybe ever. Most people just accepted that men came west for opportunity, or to escape something, or because the frontier called to a certain kind of restless spirit. But she asked like she really wanted to know, like his answer mattered to her. My parents died when I was young, he said slowly, working through thoughts he rarely voiced. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was 17, angry at the world, getting into trouble. An uncle took me in, but I was too wild for Boston society, too rough around the edges. So he gave me some money and sent me west to make something of myself, or die trying. He laughed without much humor. Guess I chose the first option. Her hand came to rest on his arm, light and warm and steady. I'm glad you did. Their eyes met and held, and the air between them felt charged with possibility, with the weight of everything unspoken. Quinn had kissed women before, had even fancied himself in love once or twice, but nothing had ever felt like this, like standing on the edge of something vast and important and terrifying. Olivia, he started, not sure what he was going to say, but she leaned forward and pressed 2 fingers gently against his lips. Not yet, she said softly. I feel it too, whatever this is between us. But it's too fast, too much. I just got here. I need time to find my footing, to become myself in this place before I can figure out who I am with someone else. Do you understand? He did, even though every part of him wanted to protest, wanted to pull her close and tell her they could figure it out together. But she was right. She'd been through trauma, was in a new place with new responsibilities, needed time to breathe and heal and settle. And he needed to be sure this wasn't just protective instinct on his part, wasn't just the way she'd fallen literally into his path, making him think it was fate. I understand, he said against her fingers, and she dropped her hand but stayed close. But I'm not going anywhere, Olivia. I'll give you time, but I'm not giving up. Her smile was tremulous but real. Good. I don't want you to. They finished moving her things in comfortable silence after that, a peace between them that felt solid despite the tension of attraction and unspoken feelings. When everything was inside and organized to her satisfaction, Quinn took his leave, promising to check on her in a few days, making her promise to send word to his ranch if she needed anything at all. He rode home that afternoon, feeling lighter than he had in years, despite the ache of wanting and waiting. His ranch hands noticed his good mood, ribbing him about it over dinner, until he told them to mind their own business with no real heat behind the words. That night he lay in bed and thought about dark hair and brown eyes and quiet strength, and let himself imagine a future that included all of those things. The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both natural and charged with anticipation. Olivia threw herself into preparing for the school year, cleaning the small schoolhouse and organizing her materials and meeting with parents to discuss their children's education. Quinn found excuses to come into town more often than strictly necessary, and somehow his path always seemed to cross hers. They'd talk on her porch in the evenings, sharing stories and learning each other's histories. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother's love of books and her father's stern but fair discipline, about the brother she'd lost to the war and the loneliness of being the only one left. He told her about building his ranch from raw land, about the satisfaction of hard work and seeing something grow from nothing, about the hired hands who'd become like family and the quiet pride of making something that would last. The town watched their careful courtship with interest and approval. In a place where single women were scarce and good men scarcer, seeing 2 decent people find each other was cause for hope. Mrs. Harrison became Olivia's champion and confidant, offering advice on frontier living and teaching and matters of the heart with equal enthusiasm. Sheriff Garrett started inviting Quinn to stay for dinner when he came to town, making sure he had reasons to linger near a certain teacher's cottage. Even the children who would soon be Olivia's students adopted her as one of their own, bringing her small gifts and asking eager questions about what school would be like. Through it all, Quinn and Olivia circled each other like dancers learning a new pattern, attracted but cautious, wanting but waiting. He learned that she liked her coffee with sugar but no cream, that she could quote Shakespeare from memory but couldn't carry a tune to save her life, that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when it came to things she cared about. She learned that he was more educated than his rough exterior suggested, that he could gentle a wild horse with patience and kindness, that he carried guilt for the men he'd killed, even though they'd deserved it, that he dreamed of having a family someday, but feared he was too rough for domestic happiness. Summer deepened into early fall, and the air began to carry just a hint of coolness in the mornings and evenings. The school year approached, and Olivia grew nervous, wanting everything to be perfect for her students. Quinn helped her repair some broken desks and build shelves for her books, and watching her organize her classroom with such care and attention made him fall a little more in love with her every day. Because that's what this was, he'd stopped denying it to himself. Love, pure and simple and complicated all at once. Love that had started with seeing her bound to a tree and calling her brave. Love that had grown through shared evenings and honest conversations and the slow building of trust and respect. Love that made him think about forever, instead of just getting through the day. The question was whether she felt the same, and when the right time would be to ask. The answer came on a September evening, when he arrived in town to find her porch empty and her cottage dark. Concerned, he went to the Harrisons and found Mrs. Harrison looking worried. "She's at the schoolhouse, has been all afternoon, won't come out, won't talk to anyone. Something's upset her terrible, but she won't say what." Quinn's protective instincts flared immediately. "I'll go talk to her." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple building with big windows to let in light. He could see a lamp burning inside as he approached, could see Olivia's silhouette as she moved around the room. He knocked softly on the door, and her movement stopped. "Olivia, it's Quinn. Can I come in?" Silence, long enough that he thought she might refuse. Then her voice thick with tears. "It's not locked." He found her sitting at her desk with her head in her hands, and his heart contracted at the sight. In 3 strides he was beside her, kneeling down so he could see her face. "What happened? What's wrong?" She looked up, and he saw tear tracks on her cheeks, saw despair in her eyes. "I got a letter today. From the school board in Denver. Apparently my replacement there didn't work out, and they want me back. They're offering more money, better accommodations, a guaranteed position." She laughed bitterly. "Everything I thought I wanted when I was there." "But?" he prompted gently, pretty sure he knew where this was going, but needing to hear her say it. "But I don't want to go back. I want to stay here. I've only been here 2 months, but this already feels more like home than Denver ever did. The people here matter to me. This place matters to me." She looked at him, and fresh tears spilled over. "You matter to me, and I'm terrified that's a mistake, that I'm giving up security and certainty for something that might not work out. And what if I'm being a fool?" Relief and joy and tenderness flooded through him in equal measure. He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Look at me, Olivia. Look at me and tell me what you feel." She met his eyes, her own swimming with emotion. "I feel like I can't breathe when you're not around. Like the best part of my day is when I see you riding down the street. Like I want to know everything about you and tell you everything about me. Like maybe I could be brave enough to build a life here if I had you beside me." "Then stay," he said, pouring everything he felt into those 2 words. "Stay and teach these children and make a difference like you wanted. Stay and let me court you proper, the way you deserve. Stay and see where this goes between us, because I'm already sure where I want it to go, but I need you to be sure too." "Where?" she whispered. "Where do you want it to go?" "Everywhere," he said simply. "Marriage and partnership and building a life together. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Olivia Reed. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you tied to that tree, fighting to survive. I fell deeper when I learned how strong you are, how kind and smart and stubborn. I want you to stay, not just in Snowflake, but in my life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to support your teaching and build my ranch and make a family with you, if you'll have me." She was crying in earnest now, but she was smiling too, radiant through the tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. I love you too, Quinn. I've been trying not to because it seemed too fast, too intense, but I can't help it. You make me feel safe and seen and valued. You make me want to be brave." He kissed her then, finally, after weeks of wanting and waiting. Kissed her soft and sweet, and then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, her body pressing close to his. She tasted like salt from her tears, and something sweeter, something uniquely her. And he never wanted to stop kissing her. But eventually they had to break apart for air, and he rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Marry me," he said, because he couldn't wait, couldn't be patient anymore. "Not right away if you don't want, but soon. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," she said again, laughing now, giddy with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you. Soon as we can arrange it." They sat there on the schoolhouse floor for a long time, holding each other and making quiet promises, planning a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. When they finally emerged into the cool evening air, hand in hand, they found half the town waiting outside, drawn by the news that something was happening with their teacher and their rancher. Mrs. Harrison took one look at their joined hands and glowing faces and let out a whoop of joy that started a chain reaction of congratulations and well wishes. They were married 3 weeks later in that same schoolhouse, with the whole town in attendance and wildflowers decorating every surface. Olivia wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that she'd brought from Boston, and Quinn wore his best suit and a look of such happiness that several women in attendance were moved to tears. Sheriff Garrett stood up as his best man, and Mrs. Harrison served as Olivia's matron of honor. The circuit preacher who came through monthly performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, and Quinn kissed his bride, the schoolhouse erupted in cheers and applause. The wedding celebration lasted well into the night, with food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. But eventually Quinn and Olivia slipped away, riding out to his ranch under a sky full of stars. She'd seen it before, had come out several times during their courtship to walk the land and meet his ranch hands and envision herself building a life there. But now it was hers too, officially and completely, and the feeling of coming home was overwhelming. Quinn carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, making her laugh with the formality of it, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson." "Mrs. Dawson," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "I like the sound of that." "Good," he said, pulling her close. "Because you're stuck with it now?" She kissed him, slow and deep and full of promise. "I can think of worse fates." Their wedding night was tender and passionate by turns, a joining that went beyond just physical, as they learned each other's bodies and preferences and secrets. Quinn had been with women before, but never like this, never with such emotion and connection underlying every touch and kiss. Olivia was less experienced but eager and unafraid, trusting him to guide her, and the trust implicit in that trust nearly undid him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed he'd made himself years ago, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, needing to hear it. "So happy," she murmured, pressing a kiss over his heart. "I can't believe this is real sometimes. 2 months ago, I was alone and scared and certain I was going to die. Now I'm married to the best man I've ever known, starting a new life in a place I love. It's almost too much good fortune." "You deserve it," he said fiercely. "You deserve every bit of happiness and more, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her dark hair falling around them like a curtain. "I'm going to hold you to that promise, cowboy." "Please do," he said, and pulled her down for another kiss. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment for both of them, learning to live together and merge their separate lives into one shared existence. Olivia continued teaching, throwing herself into educating the children of Snowflake with passionate dedication. Her students adored her, and under her guidance, the school became the heart of the community in many ways. Parents who'd never had much schooling themselves saw their children learning to read and write and cipher, saw doors opening that had always been closed before. Quinn supported her teaching completely, proud of the work she was doing, even as he continued building his ranch. He taught her to ride properly, and she became confident enough on horseback that she could ride out to meet him in the far pastures sometimes, bringing lunch and staying to watch him work. He loved those days best when she'd sit on a rock or lean against a fence and just be there with him, her presence making the hard work feel lighter. They built a garden together that first spring, Olivia insisting she wanted to grow vegetables and herbs, even though she'd never gardened before in her life. Quinn indulged her, helping her turn the soil and plant seeds, and then watching with amused affection as she tended those plants with fierce determination. When they actually produced food, she was so proud she nearly burst, serving him meals made with their own vegetables and beaming at his praise. They had their first real fight about 6 months in, over something stupid that Quinn couldn't even remember later. What he did remember was the terrible feeling of discord between them, the way Olivia had gone silent and withdrawn, and how much that had hurt. They'd resolved it by talking, actually talking instead of letting it fester, and the making up afterward had been intense and sweet. They'd promised each other then that they'd never go to bed angry, that they'd work through problems together instead of apart. It was a promise they mostly kept, though they both had moments of stubbornness that tested it. Their first Christmas together was magical, spent snowed in at the ranch with just each other for company. Quinn carved her a wooden box for her keepsakes, and Olivia knitted him a scarf in deep blue wool, and they exchanged gifts on Christmas morning like children, delighted with each simple present. They made love in front of the fireplace and cooked a modest feast together and talked late into the night about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Olivia said, curled against his side, with the firelight playing over her face. "Lots of them. I know that's greedy, but I hated being alone after my brother died. I want this house full of noise and chaos and love." "How many is lots?" Quinn asked, amused and touched, and already imagining sons and daughters with her dark hair and his stubbornness. "Ish 4? 5? She looked up at him hopefully. "Is that too many?" "Not if that's what you want," he assured her. "I'll give you as many babies as you want, as long as you're happy." She kissed him, soft and grateful. "I'm so happy I don't have words for it sometimes. You've given me everything I didn't even know I wanted." "Right back at you," he said, and meant it down to his bones. They started trying for a baby that winter, though Olivia insisted on finishing out the school year before getting pregnant if they could manage the timing. As it turned out, nature had its own schedule. She realized she was expecting an early spring, and the joy and terror on her face when she told Quinn made his heart squeeze in his chest. "You're sure?" he asked, hands going to her still flat stomach with wonder. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday. He says everything looks good, that I'm healthy, and the baby should be too." She covered his hands with hers. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, then paused. "But terrified too. What if I'm not a good father? What if I mess this up?" "You won't," she said with complete confidence. "You're already good at everything you put your mind to. You'll be an excellent father." He hoped she was right. The next months were a revelation as he watched her body change, watched their child grow inside her. She had some sickness in the early months that left her pale and miserable, but she refused to stop teaching until the last possible moment, insisting the children needed her. Finally, when she was so obviously pregnant that sitting at her desk became difficult, she agreed to take a leave and let the older students help each other while Quinn hired a temporary teacher from a neighboring town. She nested at the ranch like a bird preparing for spring, organizing and reorganizing the small bedroom they had designated as the nursery, sewing baby clothes and blankets with Mrs. Harrison's help. Quinn built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with care and finishing it smooth so no rough edges could hurt tender baby skin. Olivia cried when she saw it, hormones making her emotions run close to the surface, and Quinn held her and felt a love so big it nearly choked him. Their son was born on a cool October evening in their first year of marriage, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to anyone within earshot. Olivia labored for hours, and Quinn stayed with her the whole time, despite Mrs. Harrison's suggestions that he might want to wait elsewhere. He couldn't leave her, couldn't abandon her to face this alone. And so he held her hand and wiped her forehead and told her how strong she was, how brave, until finally the baby emerged squalling and perfect. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced with satisfaction. "Healthy lungs on this one." Quinn looked at his son for the first time and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This tiny person, red-faced and angry at being born, already had him completely wrapped around his tiny fingers. When the doctor handed the baby to Olivia and Quinn saw his wife holding their child, both of them alive and well, he had to turn away to compose himself before the tears could fall. "Quinn," Olivia called softly, and when he turned back, she was smiling at him with such love and tenderness that the tears came anyway. "Come meet your son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby in her arms. "He's so small." "He's perfect," she corrected, "just like his father." They named him James, after Olivia's brother, with Quinn's last name and his father's middle name. Little James Dawson slept and ate and cried and completely rearranged their lives in the way only a newborn can. Quinn had never been so tired or so happy, staggering through days on too little sleep, but unable to resent it when the reason was this small person who depended on them completely. Olivia bloomed into motherhood like she'd been born for it, natural and confident even when she was exhausted. She nursed James and sang to him, and somehow still managed to keep the household running with Quinn's help. They worked together seamlessly, trading off baby duty and chores, supporting each other through the hard early days when James seemed to cry more than sleep. "We're doing all right, aren't we?" Olivia asked one night when James was finally asleep, and they were collapsed together on the sofa, too tired to move. "Better than all right," Quinn said, pulling her closer. "You're amazing with him. I knew you would be, but seeing it is something else." "You're pretty amazing yourself," she said, yawning against his shoulder. "I couldn't do this without you." "You shouldn't have to," he said firmly. "We're partners in this, in everything." By the time James was 6 months old, Olivia was starting to talk about going back to teaching, missing her students and the work she loved. They worked out a system where she'd teach in the mornings, and Quinn's housekeeper, a kindly older woman named Martha, who'd recently been hired to help with the growing workload, would watch James. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough, and Olivia seemed lighter, happier, having both her family and her purpose fulfilled. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, came along just as James was turning 2. This time the labor was faster and easier, and when Dr. Harrison placed the baby girl in Quinn's arms, he looked down at her tiny face and felt his heart expand even further than he'd thought possible. Rose had Olivia's coloring and his features, a combination that made her beautiful, even as a red-faced newborn. "Two down," Olivia said from the bed, looking tired but triumphant. "How many more did I say I wanted?" "We can discuss that later," Quinn said diplomatically, making her laugh. Rose proved to be a calmer baby than James had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes and sleep for longer stretches. James adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and getting very upset if anyone suggested he was too small to help. Watching his children together, seeing the beginnings of the sibling bond forming, made Quinn grateful all over again for the life he'd built. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. James started school with his mother as his teacher, which was sometimes a blessing and sometimes caused friction when he felt she was being harder on him than the other students. Rose grew from a calm baby into a spirited toddler who kept them all on their toes. The ranch prospered under Quinn's management, growing from a modest operation into one of the larger spreads in the territory. They hired more hands, built a bigger barn, expanded their herd. Their third child, another boy they named Thomas, arrived when James was 5 and Rose was 3. By this point, they had the rhythm of parenthood down, though adding a third child to the mix brought its own chaos. Thomas was a happy baby who grew into an adventurous child, always climbing something or getting into places he shouldn't be. More than once, Quinn had to rescue him from trees or the barn loft, or other high places that shouldn't have been accessible to someone so small. Olivia continued teaching through it all, though she had to take breaks for each pregnancy and the early months after birth. The town built a bigger schoolhouse as more families settled in the area, and Olivia hired an assistant teacher to help manage the growing number of students. She was beloved by multiple generations of children by this point, known for her firm but fair discipline and her genuine care for every student who passed through her classroom. Quinn watched his wife juggle teaching and motherhood and being his partner in running the ranch, and his admiration for her only grew. She was everything he'd known she would be and more, strong and capable and loving in equal measure. On their 10th anniversary, he took her to Santa Fe for a week, leaving the children with Martha and the ranch hands, and they spent 7 days remembering what it was like to just be Quinn and Olivia, not mom and dad and teacher and rancher. "Thank you for this," she said one evening as they walked through the plaza, her hand warm in his. "I love our children desperately, but I needed this time with just you." "I know what you mean," he said, pulling her close to kiss her temple. "They're everything, but sometimes I miss when it was just us, learning each other." "We're still learning each other," she pointed out. "We'll be learning each other until we're old and gray and sitting on the porch watching our grandchildren play." "Is that how you see us ending up?" he asked, charmed by the image. "That's exactly how I see us ending up," she confirmed, "old and happy and surrounded by family. Is that all right with you?" "It's perfect," he said, "just like you." Their 4th child arrived when Olivia was 35, a surprise daughter they named Grace, who came into the world during a spring thunderstorm. Grace had her father's coloring, but her mother's features and temperament, calm and thoughtful even as a baby. She completed their family in a way they hadn't known was missing, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. By this point, James was almost 10, already showing signs of growing into a young man who'd be tall and strong like his father. Rose was 8 and precocious, determined to learn everything and be involved in everything. Thomas was 5 and still getting into trouble on a regular basis, though his charm usually got him out of the worst consequences. And baby Grace slept peacefully through the chaos of her older siblings, content in the knowledge that she was loved. Quinn was 40 now, his dark hair starting to show threads of silver at the temples, his body marked by years of hard work, but still strong and capable. Olivia was 35 and more beautiful to him than she'd been the day he found her. Maturity and motherhood adding depths to her loveliness that youth alone could never achieve. They had been married 12 years, together for 13 if you counted the courtship, and he loved her more with each passing day. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children were inside with Martha, and they'd stolen a few moments of peace before the evening routine of baths and bedtime stories. "Regret what?" he asked, genuinely confused. "This life. Me. Staying here instead of maybe moving somewhere easier, somewhere more civilized." She wasn't looking at him, her eyes on the horizon, and he could hear the vulnerability in her voice. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Olivia, look at me." She did, and he saw insecurity there, worry that maybe she wasn't enough or hadn't given him enough. It broke his heart that she could doubt, even for a moment, the joy she'd brought into his life. "I have never regretted a single moment of this life with you," he said clearly, needing her to hear him and believe him. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, and this life we built together, it's more than I ever dreamed of having. Some men spend their whole lives looking for what we found, and never come close. I thank God every day that I decided to ride into town that afternoon, that I found you when I did, that you were brave enough to stay and build this with me." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I love you. Sometimes I think I don't say it enough, that I take for granted that you know, but I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I know," he said, pulling her close. "And I love you right back, just as much. We're going to grow old together, just like you said. Old and happy and surrounded by family. I promise you that." She kissed him then, sweet and soft and full of 13 years of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, the sun had set and the first stars were appearing overhead, and inside they could hear their children laughing about something. Quinn looked at his wife, at the home they'd made, at the life they'd built from nothing but courage and determination and love, and knew he was the luckiest man alive. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. James turned into a serious young man who took to ranching like he'd been born for it, riding beside his father from the time he was 12 and learning everything Quinn could teach him about cattle and land management and honest dealing. Rose discovered a passion for teaching and would often help her mother in the schoolhouse, showing a natural talent for explaining concepts and working with younger children. Thomas remained their wild child, always pushing boundaries and testing limits, but with a good heart underneath the mischief. And Grace grew from a calm baby into a calm child who loved books and quiet pursuits, content to sit with her mother and read for hours. When James turned 18, Quinn deeded him a portion of the ranch and helped him build his own house on the property. His son was courting a girl from town, Sarah Miller, and Quinn could see marriage on the horizon. It made him feel old and young at the same time, remembering what it was like to be 18 and in love, but also aware that he was now the older generation, the father watching his children build their own lives. James and Sarah married that fall, in a ceremony that reminded Quinn so much of his own wedding, it made his chest tight with nostalgia. Olivia cried through the whole thing, happy tears that she didn't try to hide, and when James and his new bride rode off to their own home on the ranch, she turned to Quinn with a watery smile. "When did we get old enough to have a married son?" she asked. "We're not old," he protested, though he knew what she meant. "We're just well-seasoned." She laughed and let him pull her close, and they watched the sun set together like they had 1,000 times before, and would 1,000 times more, if God was willing. Rose left for teachers' college in San Francisco when she turned 19, determined to get formal training before coming back to teach in Snowflake. Her departure left a hole in their household that took time to adjust to, but they were proud of her ambition and determination. Thomas, now 15, seemed to settle down some after his older siblings left home, as if he'd finally figured out he needed to grow up. He still got into scrapes, but they were fewer and less serious, and Quinn started to see the man his son would become emerging from the boy he'd been. Grace, at 13, remained their quiet, bookish child, happiest when lost in a story, or helping her mother with lesson planning. She reminded Quinn of Olivia in so many ways, the same thoughtful intelligence and stubborn dedication to things she cared about. He loved all his children equally but differently, appreciating the unique person each one had become. Quinn and Olivia's 25th anniversary arrived on a crisp October day, the air smelling of wood smoke and falling leaves. Their children threw them a party, all of them coming home for the occasion. James and Sarah brought their 2-year-old son, Henry, making Quinn and Olivia grandparents for the first time. Rose came home from San Francisco full of stories about college and city life. Thomas and Grace conspired together to decorate the ranch house with flowers and ribbons, making it festive and bright. At the party, surrounded by family and friends and the community they'd built their lives in, Quinn stood up to make a toast. 25 years ago, I was a lonely rancher who thought the best I could hope for was a comfortable, solitary life, building something to leave behind when I died. Then I found a woman tied to a tree, and everything changed. Olivia laughed, as did everyone else who knew the story, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. I called her brave that day, Quinn continued, and she's proven me right every day since. She was brave enough to stay in a strange place, to marry a rough cowboy, to build a life in hard country. She was brave enough to be a mother and a teacher and a partner. She's been my rock, my love, my best friend for 25 years, and if I'm lucky, I'll get 25 more. He raised his glass toward Olivia, who was definitely crying now. To my wife, the bravest person I know. I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. To Olivia, the crowd chorused, and she stood up and came to him, kissing him right there in front of everyone with the kind of passion that made their children groan in embarrassment and their friends cheer. I love you, she said against his lips. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life. Thank you for choosing me, he said back. Thank you for staying. They danced that night like they hadn't in years, holding each other close while a borrowed fiddle player provided music and their family watched with affection. Quinn looked at his wife, at the gray threading through her dark hair and the laugh lines around her eyes, and thought she'd never been more beautiful. They'd built something real and lasting, something that would continue through their children and grandchildren, through the students Olivia had taught and the community they'd helped shape. The next years brought more changes and joys. Rose came home with a teaching degree and took over as head teacher at the Snowflake School when Olivia finally decided to retire at 50. Thomas married a spirited woman named Laura who could match his energy and keep him in line, and they settled on a ranch bordering Quinn's property. Grace went to college back east but came home after 2 years, confessing she missed Arizona and wanted to write stories about the frontier. She set up a small office in the ranch house and spent her days filling pages with tales of cowboys and teachers and brave women building lives in hard country. James and Sarah had 3 more children, giving Quinn and Olivia 4 grandchildren who descended on the ranch like a small tornado whenever they visited. The joy of being grandparents was different from being parents, with all the fun and fewer of the responsibilities. Quinn loved teaching his grandchildren to ride and rope and work the land, seeing his legacy continue through them. Olivia loved reading to them and answering their endless questions and watching them play together the way her own children once had. When Quinn turned 60, James threw him a birthday party and gave a speech about what kind of father and grandfather he'd been. My dad taught me that being a man means being honest and working hard and treating people right, James said, his voice thick with emotion. He taught me that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling you have. And he showed me what a good marriage looks like by the way he loves my mother, with respect and partnership and devotion. I hope I can be half the man he is. Quinn had to leave the party for a few minutes after that, overwhelmed by emotion and pride. Olivia found him on the porch, looking out at the land he'd worked for almost 40 years, and slipped her hand into his. Our children turned out pretty well, she said softly. They did, he agreed. We did good, you and me. We did, she said, and leaned her head on his shoulder. They stood there together as the party continued inside, comfortable in their silence and their love, and Quinn thought about that day so long ago when he'd found her tied to a tree. One decision, one moment of riding into town at the right time, had led to everything good in his life, had led to this woman beside him, to their children and grandchildren, to the rich, full life he'd never dreamed possible. "I'd do it all again," he said suddenly, needing her to know. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I'd do it all exactly the same if it meant ending up here with you." She turned to look up at him, her brown eyes still as warm and deep as they'd been when she was 23 and he was 28, and they were just starting this journey. "Me too," she said, "every single moment. You saved my life that day, Quinn, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live it. You gave me everything." He kissed her there on the porch of their home, with their children and grandchildren laughing inside, and the Arizona sunset painting the sky in impossible colors. And it felt like a promise fulfilled, a promise to love and protect and cherish, to build something lasting, to be brave enough to reach for happiness and hold on to it with both hands. Years continued to pass in the easy rhythm of a life well lived. Quinn's hair turned fully gray and then white, and his body showed the wear of decades of hard work, but he was healthy and strong for his age. Olivia's dark hair silvered beautifully, and she remained as sharp and determined as ever, though she moved more slowly now and needed reading glasses for her beloved books. They spent their days on the ranch, helping where they could, but mostly letting their children run things now. James had taken over the day-to-day operations, and he was doing a fine job of it, better than Quinn had in some ways because he'd grown up with the benefit of his father's experience. They traveled some in these later years, taking trips to see Rose in San Francisco and Grace on her book tours when her frontier stories became unexpectedly popular. They visited Santa Fe and Denver, and once, on their 40th anniversary, made the long journey back to Boston so Olivia could show Quinn where she'd grown up. It was strange seeing the city, seeing the contrast between her refined upbringing and the rough frontier life she'd chosen, but it helped him understand her even better. See how much courage it had taken to make the leap she'd made. Their grandchildren grew up and started having children of their own, making Quinn and Olivia great-grandparents when they were in their early 70s. The ranch house that had once seemed so big when it was just the two of them now overflowed with family on holidays and special occasions. 3 generations gathering to celebrate and connect. Quinn would sit in his chair by the fire at these gatherings and watch his family interact, see the love and strength that flowed between them, and feel a satisfaction so deep it was almost painful. "We did this," Olivia would say, echoing his thoughts as she so often did. "This whole beautiful family, it started with us. Started with you being brave enough to stay," he'd correct. "Started with you choosing this life, choosing me." "Best choice I ever made," she'd say, and kiss his weathered cheek, and he'd hold her hand and count his blessings. When Quinn was 75 and Olivia was 70, they made the decision to build a small house on the property, closer to town, and let James and his family have the main ranch house. It was time, they both agreed, to step back fully and let the next generation take the reins. The small house suited them perfectly, cozy and manageable, with a big porch where they could sit and watch the world go by. They fell into a comfortable routine in their later years, mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the sun come up over the land they'd worked together, afternoons reading or visiting with grandchildren or taking short walks around the property, evenings by the fire, talking or sitting in companionable silence, still learning each other after more than 50 years of marriage. "Do you remember the day you found me?" Olivia asked one evening, apropos of nothing. They were on the porch watching a summer sunset, the air soft and warm around them. "Every detail," Quinn said. "The way the sun was shining through your hair, the defiance in your eyes even though you were terrified, the rope burns on your wrists, the way you collapsed against me when I cut you free." He paused, memory washing over him. "I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. You kept calling me that, brave. I held on to that word like a lifeline in those early days when everything was new and scary." She smiled, a little sad, a little wistful. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified most of the time. But you believed I was brave, so I tried to live up to it." "You did more than live up to it," he said firmly. "You exceeded it. You're still the bravest person I know." She laughed softly. "We're both old and foolish now, I think. Brave would be admitting how scared I am about what comes next." He knew what she meant without her having to explain. They were both slowing down, their bodies showing the inevitable wear of time. They'd been lucky so far, both reasonably healthy, but they weren't naive about the fact that their time was growing shorter. The question of who would go first, of how they'd manage without each other, hung unspoken between them more often now. "We'll face it together," he said, taking her hand. "However much time we have left, we'll face it the same way we faced everything else. Together." "Together," she agreed, and squeezed his hand, and they sat there as the stars came out and the night birds began their songs, holding tight to each other and the life they'd built. Quinn Dawson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82 on a cool autumn morning that reminded everyone of the day he'd married his beloved Olivia 54 years earlier. He'd lived a full, rich life, surrounded by family and love, and everyone agreed there were worse ways to go than falling asleep beside the woman you'd loved for more than half a century and simply not waking up. Olivia grieved him with the depth and passion she'd brought to everything in her life, but she didn't let the grief consume her, didn't give up on living even though a huge part of her had died with him. She had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who needed her, had students whose lives she'd touched, who still came to visit and thank her for making a difference. She had Grace, who'd moved back home to care for her mother, and the small house Quinn had built, where memories of him lived in every corner. She lived 4 more years after Quinn's death, years filled with family and quiet contentment, and the sure knowledge that she'd be reunited with him eventually. When she passed away at 77, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were, "Tell Quinn I'm coming. Tell him to wait for me." They buried her next to Quinn on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the endless Arizona sky and the land they had loved. The whole town turned out for the funeral, 3 generations of students she'd taught and lives she'd touched, coming to pay respects to a woman who'd made a difference. At the service, James stood up to speak about his parents. "My father found my mother tied to a tree in the middle of the desert, and he saved her life," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But she saved his right back. She saved him from loneliness and gave him purpose beyond just building a ranch. Together, they built a family and a legacy that will continue through all of us here today. They showed us what real love looks like, what true partnership means. They were brave in all the ways that matter, brave enough to commit to each other and work through the hard times and build something beautiful that will outlast them." He paused, emotion making his voice thick. "They're together now, wherever they are. And I like to think my dad is saying to my mom what he said that first day, all those years ago. I like to think he's calling her brave." The gravestone they placed was simple but beautiful, carved from local stone. It read, "Quinn and Olivia Dawson. He called her brave. She called him home. Together forever." And underneath, the dates of their births and deaths, bracketing lives well lived and a love story for the ages, born in the wild Arizona desert and lasting beyond death itself. Their story became legend in Snowflake and the surrounding territory, passed down through generations as an example of what could happen when courage met opportunity, when 2 people brave enough to take a chance on each other built something lasting. Children learned about the teacher who came west and the cowboy who saved her. Grandchildren heard about the love that grew from that dramatic beginning into something deep and enduring. Great-grandchildren inherited not just land and money, but the legacy of what it meant to be a Dawson, the values and strength and love that Quinn and Olivia had established and nurtured. The ranch continued to prosper under James's stewardship, and then his children's, growing and changing with the times, but never losing sight of the principles Quinn had established. Rose's children became teachers and carried on Olivia's dedication to education. Thomas's line produced adventurers and explorers, people who pushed boundaries while maintaining strong family ties. Grace's writing preserved their story, made sure it would never be forgotten. On summer evenings, when the family gathered at the ranch for reunions and celebrations, someone would always tell the story of how it all began. How Quinn had been riding into town for supplies on an ordinary day that became extraordinary. How Olivia had been tied to a tree, left to die, but had survived through sheer strength of will. How he'd cut her free and called her brave, and how that single word had changed both their lives. The story never got old, no matter how many times it was told, because at its heart, it was a story about courage and love and building something meaningful from nothing. It was a story about second chances and taking risks and holding tight to the people who matter. It was a story about the Wild West and the people who tamed it, not through violence but through determination and partnership, and the simple act of caring for each other. It was Quinn and Olivia's story, but it was also everyone's story, a reminder that any life can change in a moment, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that bravery comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the courage to survive. Sometimes it's the courage to stay. Sometimes it's the courage to love fully and completely, to build a life with someone, and trust that it will be enough. It was enough for Quinn and Olivia, more than enough. It was everything. And so, their story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to what two people can build when they're brave enough to try. The ranch still stands, worked by their descendants. The school still educates children, many of them taught by Rose's line of teachers. Grace's books still sell, preserving frontier stories for new audiences. And on a hillside in Arizona, two gravestones stand side by side, marking the resting place of a cowboy and a teacher who found each other in the vastness of the desert and built a love that lasted lifetimes. He called her brave, those simple words that became the foundation of everything. She proved him right, every single day of their life together, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they faced or the challenges they overcame, but the love they shared and the legacy they left behind. Their story was complete, every thread tied off, every promise fulfilled. From the moment Quinn cut those ropes and helped Olivia to her feet, through their courtship and marriage and the building of their family, through decades of partnership and love, through aging and death and the continuation of their legacy and their children and grandchildren, it all came full circle. They'd lived fully and loved deeply and left the world better than they'd found it. They'd been brave when it mattered, strong when it was needed, and gentle with each other always. They'd built something beautiful from nothing, turned a chance encounter into a lifetime of love, proved that happy endings were possible even in the harsh reality of the frontier. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings at the ranch, when the wind blew just right across the Arizona desert, you could almost hear echoes of their laughter, whispers of their conversations, the sound of two souls who'd found each other against all odds and held on tight. You could almost see them on the porch of their small house, hands entwined, watching the sunset together like they'd done thousands of times before. He'd called her brave, and she'd called him home, and together they'd built forever. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and living on in the hearts of everyone who heard it. It was complete and perfect and exactly as it should be, a closed circle of love that began with courage and ended with legacy, with every moment in between filled with the kind of devotion most people only dream of finding. Quinn and Olivia's story was done, but the love they'd created lived on, flowing through their descendants and the community they'd helped build. An eternal reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart and let someone in. And when you find that person who makes you brave, who makes you better, who feels like home, you hold on tight and never let go. That was their gift to the world, their final lesson. Love bravely, love completely, love until the very end and beyond, because that kind of love never really dies. It just transforms, becoming part of the fabric of the lives it touched, the families it created, the stories that get passed down through generations. The cowboy found a woman tied to a tree. He cut the rope and called her brave. And from that single moment of courage and compassion, everything else flowed. A love story, a family, a legacy, a life well lived, together and complete, exactly as it was meant to be.